Well, welcome back. We had a great time in our group. Lots to talk about. Hopefully you kind of got around everybody. We struggled a little bit. Anyway, we'll have an opportunity to talk more next week. So what I wanted to do is just in a way kind of refresh our minds in terms of what we've looked at so far in this course. We've actually covered quite a bit of ground already. Of course, we started by looking at perfect vision, looking at what it means to have a glimpse of the truth, have a glimpse of reality, touching something which feels more real or more true or more beautiful. And then we saw how the Eightfold Path is all about transforming the rest of our life in accordance with or in line with that vision. We could think of about it like a circle. So it's a little bit like something arises which we realize is of importance, and we actively place that in the middle of our life, and we organize the rest of our life around that. So sometimes we talk in that kind of way, that what transformation, the path of transformation means is organizing all the different elements of our life with that most important thing in the center. So we've got the path of vision and the path of transformation, and we saw that what's most important moving into the path of transformation is to transform our emotions, our attitudes, that whole volitional side of our being, and to bring that vision, that glimpse, if you like, of the truth of reality into our emotional life, so that we can develop the emotional equivalent to that insight, that clear seeing, so that we're becoming more whole, we're becoming more fully united as a human being. And we saw how a big part of that process of transformation is transforming speech. So we saw that the human person is thought of in Buddhism as comprising of body, speech, and mind. And if we really want to transform, we need to transform the way that we communicate. So perfect speech, the third limb, which we looked at last week, is the transformation of the principle of communication. So in a way, it's broader than just what we say with our mouth. It's all of the ways in which we communicate with other people. And again, we saw last week that we're doing that a lot more than we usually realize. And we had some really interesting conversation in our group there, just about how we can become more aware of what we're saying, and how it's important to do that. It was actually lovely to hear from everybody. So last week, we heard that there's different levels of perfect speech, starting with truthfulness and then deepening into affectionate speech, where we're aware of who we're talking to, being helpful and developing harmony, developing or cultivating or expressing ourselves in a way that promotes harmony and concord, leading to a kind of a sense of mutual or an awareness or an experience of mutual self-transcendence, where we're communicating so deeply that we're no longer aware of ourselves as a discrete kind of self communicating with somebody else. There's just this kind of flow of energy. So that's in a way where communication can lead us. So this week we find ourselves in the fourth limb of the path, which is perfect action. So bringing that transformation into what we do, not just what we say, but what we do. And when we enter into this area, we enter into ethics, the whole realm of ethics, and we enter into the question of what makes some acts right or wrong, perfect or imperfect. And we ask the question, well, is there a criterion? Is there some kind of benchmark by which we can measure our actions, by which we can understand them as being helpful or unhelpful, right or wrong? And whether we're aware of it or not, this question affects all of us. We all act all the time. It's one of the uncomfortable facts of human experience is that we can't not act. We're always acting. We're always responding to the life that's arising day by day, and we can't not do that. We can only decide how we're going to do that. And whether it's conscious or not, we'll all have our particular criteria. We'll all have a particular sense of what is good to do and what's not good to do. And yeah, maybe through the course of the evening, we'll become a little bit clearer about what our criteria are. So it seems like at the moment, a lot of traditional ethical structures are being questioned. A lot of traditional ways of thinking about ethics are being questioned. Particularly, I think probably it's fair to say that the notion of ethics as coming from some kind of supreme being, some kind of God figure is being questioned. So the whole notion of this kind of theistic ethics. So particularly in our context in this country, and probably in the West generally, that what's being questioned is the whole kind of Judeo-Christian ethical system, which is where you have the idea of right and wrong, and particular workings out of what's right and wrong being imposed from some kind of external figure, some kind of external agent, kind of on the human race. Yeah, so it's something. So ethics is something imposed on the human race against our will, maybe by a power or an authority external to us. So that's generally where we're kind of coming from. It's almost like thinking of ethics as coming for some reason it always reminds me of being at secondary school, and it's a bit like the principal of the school, the headmaster, is kind of laying down the law, and you either follow it and don't follow it. If you don't follow it, you've got to make sure you don't get found out. So we often have this kind of background of these rules that we have to follow. So probably probably what's most emblematic, or a kind of a symbol for that is the symbol or the image of Moses coming down from Mount Sinai with the Ten Commandments carved into stone under his arm. You might have seen an image of that. That kind of notion of the way that we should have been imposed from outside. And while we might have rejected that idea, we might have decided that we don't agree with that. It still can affect the way that we think about ourselves, the way that we think about the way that we act, the way that we value ourselves according to the way that we think about the way that we act. I was really surprised. Particularly, I remember one solitary retreat. When you go away on a solitary retreat, you learn about yourself. You discover things about yourself that you might not discover in any other way, because you're just with yourself all on your own for quite some time. And on this particular solitary retreat, it was actually when I left New Zealand in '99, I realised that I was much more influenced by a kind of Christian ethical system than I realised I was, because I didn't grow up in a strongly Christian environment. I didn't realise that was what was happening, but I noticed particularly a sense of guilt, a sense of almost some kind of inherent badness in me that I hadn't been aware of before, and I realised that that's where it had come from. So the point I'm making is that sometimes that we might have consciously rejected something, but it still kind of works itself out in the way that we relate to the world, the way we relate to other people. So I think this is the case for a lot of us, actually, that there's a kind of a residual effect of this ethical system which is coming from an external authority. So a lot of what I've been doing in these talks is I've been working quite closely from the talks that have been edited into the book, which some of you have been reading, the Noble Eightfold Path. And there's a lovely little sentence in that book, which I think is quite illustrative of where a lot of us are. Now, the talk was given 50 years ago, but I think it's still relevant, actually. He says, Sangharakshita says, we can in fact summarize the position of traditional ethics today by saying that it consists in not doing what we want to do and doing what we don't want to do, because, for reasons which we don't understand, we've been told to do so by someone in whose existence we no longer believe. I'll just read that again. We can in fact summarize the position of traditional ethics today by saying that it consists in not doing what we want to do and doing what we don't want to do because, for reasons which we don't understand, we've been told to do so by someone in whose existence we no longer believe. So there's this kind of residual thing that we haven't quite cleared up. So I think I just wanted to point that out because I think that's where a lot of us are coming from when we enter into the question of ethics and how we should live. So it's I don't want to kind of paint too stark a contrast, but actually there is quite a stark contrast between that kind of way of thinking and the Buddhist approach to ethics. So basically, according to Buddhism, actions are judged as being right or wrong, or evaluated as being right or wrong, perfect or imperfect, according to the state of mind in which they are performed. So it's the mental state which is the key determining factor in terms of the kind of value, as it were, of a particular action. So in other words, it's not the criterion for ethics is not theological. It's not to do with some external figure. It's psychological. It's determined in terms of what's going on in our own mind, in our own heart, and that's the only criteria. Yeah. So the kind of mental state that we're in. Where are we now? So actions are perfect or imperfect according to the state in which they are performed. Yeah, so that's the sort of Buddhist approach. A bit more specifically, there's two kinds of actions which are two kinds of ways that we can act according to the Buddhist approach. There's skillful action, or kusala is the traditional Pali and Sanskrit word, or akusala, which is unskillful. So that's the way we generally understand action, as being skillful or unskillful. In the absence of an external judge, notions of right and wrong are not quite so helpful, so we tend to use this language of skillful and unskillful. I'll say a bit more about why that is in a moment. So first of all, we've got skillful action. So skillful action arises from, or is an expression of, a mental state which is free from craving, hatred, and confusion. So there's no kind of selfishness, selfish craving. There's no aggression or hatred or anger, and there's no obscuration or confusion. So what it means positively is it's a mental state that's motivated by generosity, metta, and understanding. So it's very much along the lines of what we looked at a couple of weeks ago in terms of right emotion or perfect emotion. So a skillful action will be an expression of perfect emotion or skillful emotion. And an unskillful action, on the other hand, will be rooted in craving, hatred, and confusion. So there'll be some kind of afflicted mental state which is lying behind or under, as it were, the action of which it's an expression. Oopsie daisy, I pressed the wrong button there. This word skillful, this is important because what it suggests is that ethics is a matter of intelligence. It's even a matter of insight. It's much more than just good intentions. It requires, like I say, an element of skill. And I think, again, this characterizes the Buddhist approach is ethics, being ethical, acting well, requires awareness. It requires an understanding and an intelligence. And the word skillful also connotes training, where when we practice, we're trying to acquire a skill. And being ethical is a skill. It's something that we learn how to do. We were just talking in our group, actually, about how, when it comes to speech, how often we tell little white lies, not because we're kind of wicked, but just because we kind of want to get out of a situation that's a little bit uncomfortable, and often we just say things which they're not kind of gross lies. They're not intended to deceive or swindle, but they're just kind of convenient ways of getting out of a situation that we're not quite sure how to get out of. So we lack a certain skill in communication. So again, so what we're trying to do is just be a little bit more skillful. So another element I think of the word skillful, which is important, is that it connotes imagination. So I think often actually what's required in terms of acting ethically, of being skillful, is understanding. It's particularly understanding what the likely effect of our actions will be. So if our mind really is imbued with metta, with loving kindness, with an awareness of others, then we'll naturally act much more sensitively towards them. So again, there's an element of imaginative identification with the other, and that the ethical behavior, skillful behavior, will naturally arise as a consequence of that solidarity of that we feel with others. Yeah. So imagination is also another important element. So yes, so that word skillful I think is important. Like I say, because it suggests intelligence and insight. It suggests training or acquiring a skill that we're developing day by day, and it suggests imaginative identification with the other. So when you look at it in this kind of way, ethics, trying to act well, kind of comes to us in a different kind of way. It places it in a different light. So what we're trying to do when we're trying to act well, when we're trying to be skillful, is we're trying to act from what's best in us. We're trying to act for the potential we have to be truly loving, generous, and understanding. And I think another important element in the Buddhist approach is seeing that our ability to act ethically is it's almost like something innate in us. It's something innate. We have a sensitivity to what is good and what is bad. What actions are helpful for others and what actions are unhelpful for others. What we have a sensitivity to our own mind when we act in a particular way. We have a sensitivity to how certain actions influence our character. And what Buddhist ethics is about, the training of it, because Buddhism is often talked about the training of it is training or refining that sensibility that we already have, to determine, to understand, to evaluate what is a good way of acting and what isn't a good way of acting. So yes, like I say, we're trying to make that, to sort of educate that innate sense that we have, because it doesn't happen automatically. It needs sort of education. It needs drawing out. It needs refining. So perfect action, hopefully it's clear, is not just an action which accords with some kind of external standard or criteria. It's an action that expresses perfect vision. In other words, an understanding of what's really going on, and perfect emotion, which is an emotion that is reasonable, you could say, that's adequate to that reality. Another way of putting it is that perfect emotion represents the descent to the level of action of perfect vision and perfect emotion, in the same way that perfect speech represents the descent of perfect vision and perfect emotion into the whole area of human communication. So ultimately, and I mean, I'm very aware, we talked about this in our group as well, that in a way, Buddhism, when we're talking about, particularly about the Eightfold Path, is presented in highly kind of idealistic terms. It's sort of suggesting, quite strongly actually, that you could live in such a way where you only act skillfully. Anyway, that's what we're being encouraged by the Buddha to do, to actually entertain that as a distinct possibility that we could if we continue to train to bring awareness, to practice week by week and day by day, we could actually find ourselves in a state where we only act skillfully, that unskillful behavior is completely absent. So that perfect action then would be entirely a sort of spontaneous expression through action of like I say, perfect vision and perfect emotion. So that's a kind of ideal. That's where we're heading. That's why we're talking about all this, so we can begin to move towards that. So hopefully that's clear so far. When you start talking about ethics, it raises a lot of questions. So I can see there's a couple of questions in the chat box already, which is great. Because we're really talking about the stuff of life. We are agents, we do stuff. That's what we are as human beings. So when you start asking questions about what's a good way to do stuff and what's a bad way to do stuff, you're really getting to grips. You're really getting right down to the heart of the day-to-day of our lives. And I think that's why it raises a lot of questions. So like I was saying, I mean, in a way, if you really were awakened, if you had a complete vision of existence, if you had your emotions were completely in harmony with that, your speech was completely in harmony with that, your actions were completely in harmony with that, you wouldn't need to think in terms of being ethical or not being ethical, being skillful or not being skillful. You just naturally be skillful. So you could say that skillful behavior is just what an enlightened being would do naturally. And they wouldn't have to think about doing it. They wouldn't have to practice it. It would just be the natural expression of their nature, so to speak. So because we don't find ourselves in that situation, because we know ourselves that there are unskillful tendencies within our own minds, we need some kind of way of training in ethics. And so what you find is that even though there's no kind of external set of rules imposed, what you will find are certain lists of training principles, sikkahs as they're called, which literally means something like training principle. So you'll find various lists of precepts is what they're normally called. Which, like I say, are kind of patterns, if you like, of ethical behavior. They're what ethical behavior looks like. They're what the expression of skillful mental states looks like. So we can begin to see where we are in relation to that. It gives us something a little bit more concrete to kind of work with in different areas of our life than just the general principle of skillful and unskillful mental states. So what I wanted to do is just go through, or just explore probably what is the most fundamental list of Buddhist precepts, Buddhist ethical precepts, Buddhist ethical training principles, which is the list of 5. So many of you will be familiar with this, but if you've not come across them before, I'll just introduce them now. So I have a wee screen share. Where's it gone? Here we go. So the 5 precepts is, first of all, abstention from harming living beings. Harming living beings is obviously an expression of hatred. Think about what we're doing and reflect on whether what we're doing is harming other living beings. It might. I mean, the most egregious example of that is killing another person, but it can be much more subtle in terms of the way that we act, where we're acting in a way that's not in the best interests of others. So the way these are often described is in purely negative terms, but if you actually look at the Buddhist tradition, they're often talked about as both something that you try and abstain from, but also something you try and cultivate, and in a way it's important to do both. If you just think purely of ethics in terms of abstaining from unskillfulness, it gives it a sort of a one-sidedly negative kind of atmosphere, actually. So we also need to think in terms of cultivating something as well as letting something go or moving away from something. So the positive counterpart of abstention from harming living beings is love or metta. It's that deep fellow feeling, that deep goodwill that we try and cultivate, particularly through practices like the metta bhavana. So you could say that the abstention from harming living beings is the extension of metta off our meditation question and into our interactions with others. So the second precept, abstention from taking that are not given, you notice that the language it kind of captures the spirit of it. It doesn't just say don't steal things. It says don't take what hasn't been freely given to you, which encompasses the spirit of it. So you're not you're not acting out of craving, out of selfish craving, where you're privileging your needs or wants over other people's. Yeah, so the positive counterpart of that is generosity. We talked about generosity quite a lot the week before last, but here it comes up again in terms of action. And then the third one is abstention from sexual misconduct. So traditionally, like if you read Buddhist texts, what this meant was abstaining from things like abduction and rape and adultery. But I think the principle is about abstaining from actions which are harmful to others through your sexual behavior, or even harmful to yourself. So it's important to recognize that there isn't a problem with same-sex relationships. I think it's important to just point that out. In a way, any way that you, I suppose, gratify your sexual desires that's not harmful is okay. There's not sort of a kind of set of prescriptions about what kinds of sexual expressions are acceptable and which aren't. The principle is one of non-harm, particularly, and again, not letting your desires override your awareness of the fact that other people can be harmed. So positively, it's the contentment. So developing contentment with whatever arrangement you have, whether you're single or whether you're in a long-term settled relationship or whatever situation you're in. Interestingly, apparently in Buddhist countries, polygamy and polyandry are practiced. There's no sort of prohibition of that or taboo about that. And marriage, again, is not seen as a sacrament traditionally in Buddhism. It doesn't make something that would otherwise be sinful okay. Marriage is simply a civil contract. It's just basically saying that we're in this relationship with each other. Please respect that. That's the kind of the gist of it. So that's the third precept is abstention from sexual misconduct and contentment. And then again, speech comes up again. So abstention from false speech or the principle of truthfulness. So that got quite an airing last week, but it's interesting that it comes up again here in relation to action. And then the fifth precept is abstention from drink and drugs that result in loss of awareness. So this is an interesting one because it's a bit open to debate, well, how much is too much? And again, I think it's important to be honest with oneself in relation to this. It's in a way quite an interesting one. Often when you dig a bit deeper into the ethical precepts, it becomes complex. Different questions. For example, if you take drugs, non-prescription illegal drugs, there's the whole question of where did you get them from, and what kind of economic system are you supporting that might be they have all kinds of violence and things attached to it which are thoroughly unsavory, even though the taking of the drugs might actually be relatively innocent. You see what I mean? And so there's all kinds of questions arise, particularly in the modern environment where everything is so interconnected and so complex. So that might be something that throws up some questions, but that's the basic principle. You're trying to, Buddhism places such a high value on awareness, on acting with awareness, and particularly acting with awareness of what the consequences are of our actions. So that there's a precept about that. the positive side, or the positive counterpart of abstention from drink and drugs that result in loss of awareness is mindfulness, is actually trying to actively cultivate awareness in our lives. So there's a bit more to say. There's a bit more to say about ethics, and probably there's some questions that have arisen from all the things that I've just been talking about. But I actually want to stop there, and we can have a break. And if there are questions, I think there actually already are a few questions in the chat box there. You could throw them over to me in the break. We'll have it's 57. It's 7:57. So let's come back at 8:07. So we'll have a 10-minute break. And like I say, if there are questions, if things have been stimulated by what I've just been talking about in relation to perfect action, then please throw them out to me, and I'll have a go at responding. All right. So we'll have a break now for 10 minutes. Back at 7 minutes past. Okay. So it's time to kick off again. So welcome back. There's a few questions, which is great. So there's a question. In our group, we were talking about how difficult it can be to be skillful and truthful when there's justifiable anger, and you are standing up for something to ensure justice for ourselves or others. Please, can you give any tips on how to navigate that when there isn't much time or room for reflection, or when kind words are just not persuasive enough? So it's a good question, because it often comes up, and I think it comes up because some of the language that's used in terms of being ethical and being skillful can sound like acquiescence. It can sound like if somebody acts unjustly or cruelly, well, you just have to kind of accept it. That would be the kind thing to do. But it's worth saying that that's not the case, that one can stand up for yourself or others, and for that expression of metta. So I suppose that the first thing to be aware of is it an expression of metta, or is it an expression of righteous indignation? So righteous indignation is not a skillful mental state, according to Buddhism. So there's no, in a way, you could say there's no justification from a Buddhist point of view, from a Buddhist ethical point of view, for getting into a negative mental state, which isn't to say that one shouldn't be quite clear where something is happening which is wrong, which is harmful, or which is an expression of oppression. So I think probably the main weapon, to use that word, that we would have as a Buddhist is clarity. So being able to articulate, if necessary, not with violence, but with some force, with some strength of conviction, why it is that we think that such and such a thing shouldn't happen. And I think it's possible to do that. I think it's possible to speak with quite a bit of force, with quite a bit of conviction, but particularly with clarity. And we could and can and should do that, but not as an expression of hatred. Often I think what happens is we see something that we don't think should happen, and we feel justified in having a state of hatred or anger about that. And I think that's quite a dangerous road, actually, when you start getting into justifying anger, because it so easily turns destructive. And like I mean, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as the poet says. And we can want to make the world a better place, but if we're not skillful, we can actually, in trying to make the world a better place, make the world a worse place by just getting embroiled in conflict. And so much of this distress I think we see around the world is because of that, which is why I think in Buddhism the emphasis is so strongly on if you want to help the world, if you want to help other people, make sure that your motivation is as pure as possible. You might not be able to make it completely pure, but really work on your mind, and that way you can enter into those areas with much more confidence that you'll actually help, rather than just create more of a mess. I mean, it's interesting listening to the radio. I was listening to the radio this morning, and it was basically a whole series of people basically complaining about the government. Now, I'm not saying that the government are beyond criticism, But I just noticed the effect of listening to all of that moaning and complaining and criticism was actually quite corrosive. And I did wonder actually if it was doing anybody any good, including the people who were being interviewed. I really did wonder about it. Like I said, I'm not saying that government policy shouldn't be criticised where that's justified, but it so easily just turns into a just unhelpful speech, to use the language from last week. If you see what I mean. Anyway, that's kind of a long response. Does that kind of answer your question, Annabelle? If you're there, I'll take that as a yes. um, uh, Wondering about prescription drugs, especially the kind that can dull awareness, for example, antidepressants or even sleeping tablets. I mean, that is a really interesting one. And again, it's probably impossible to give a simple answer to that, because if we're terrible, might need some support in order to come out of that, and that might have an effect of dulling our sensitivity, which a lot of people describe in terms of with antidepressants, with what are they, serotonin reabsorption inhibitors or whatever they're called. They everything just gets a bit dull. So I think it's something to take into consideration. But it's often with ethics, there's no black and white answers. What we need to do is to bring these principles to bear on the decisions that we make. And actually, that's one thing actually I think which is an important function of a spiritual community and friends who are also practicing, that you actually can discuss these ethical dilemmas when they inevitably arise in your life. For example, that you feel really down and the GP says, I think you should take antidepressants. You really don't want to, and you're not sure if you should. That would be a really meaty, significant dilemma that you might, talk about with friends. Obviously, you'd want to talk about with friends that you trust, but that's the sort of thing that I would talk about if I needed to with, friends like Kevin actually. There's lots of people here on the course I might talk to in that kind of way. I think that's probably about as much as I can say. But in a way, it's important to recognise that, that prescription drugs can do that, and you might not decide not to take them with that in mind. But it's a really complex area, that. Can you expand on the skillful state of delusion or confusion what falls under that heading? Right. Yeah. So it said that, an unskillful mental state is an expression of greed, hatred, and delusion, and the skillful mental state is free of that. So delusion, I suppose delusion would, often I think what that's expressing is a kind of partiality. So where we see things only in terms of ourself. Yeah, we see things purely in terms of what's in it for us. So there's an obscuration there. There's a partiality. You notice that if you get angry, you lose awareness of everything apart from what you're angry with. So there's a kind of a cognitive counterpart to the emotion of hatred. So I think that's what delusion is pointing to. It's like the cognitive counterpart to the afflicted emotions of craving and hatred. Very often it's talked about like that in Buddhism, that ignorance and craving kind of co-arise, or ignorance and hatred. Anger makes you stupid is a kind of a simple way of saying that. So that's one example, I think, of what confusion means. Confusion might mean doubt. It might mean the inability to decide on a particular course of action. So your mind is in a state of prevarication and agitation because of that. So you're not able to act clearly and skillfully, but just because you're in a state of confusion and of that kind of a state of indecision. And maybe that you've just got the wrong end of the stick, like often, one of the things that often happens, I think, is we make assumptions about what we think is happening, and then we act according to those assumptions without checking it out. So we hear something about somebody else from someone, and then we take what we've heard as the truth without bothering to check out other sources or to check in with the person whose behaviour is being to us. So we just take it as at face value, and so that and a lot of our ignorance, a lot of our confusion, a lot of is just basically mistaken assumptions. We're living out of something which is just an assumption. So that would be another example. So hopefully does that answer your question, Sam? I don't know. I can't see you there. Where are you? Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up. Great. Yeah. Yeah, they're you can dig into all this stuff in more and more detail. It is more likely that people who are drawn to Buddhism have. Is it more likely that people who are drawn to Buddhism have these skillful qualities naturally in them more so than others? It's tricky, that one, isn't it? Because I mean, we all have. I mean, according to the Buddhist tradition, all human beings have potential. The potential to develop. What's really strange is that some people do something with that potential and other people don't. And it's a bit mysterious why that is. But whether people who are drawn to Buddhism have more of those skillful qualities is very difficult to say, because I know people who in our Buddhist community who have got very skillful minds. You can tell they're just really, really wholesome people. And other people who've got well, I suppose it's a slight euphemism to say they've got a lot to work with. People who've got really, really bad tempers, for example. I know a few people Buddhist who've got like quite volatile, and I know other people who are quite volatile who don't want anything to do with Buddhism. So it's a bit strange. I'd be hesitant to say that people who are involved in Buddhism have got more skillful qualities. But what people who are Buddhists, whatever their level of qualities, they want to develop the good ones and try and transform the unhelpful ones. And like I say, quite why some people do that and some people don't is a complete mystery to me. It's very strange because like when you work in a Buddhist center like I do, you see a lot of people come through. And I gave up years ago trying to guess which of the people would stick with it and which wouldn't. I used to try and guess, you do an introductory course and you'd think, I wonder who the people are who are going to stick around. And I could never guess. It's quite mysterious. Hopefully that answers your question, Lillian. Is it? What is the main motivation of perfect action? Well, in a way, the main motivation of perfect action is metta, generosity, and understanding. So perfect action is the expression of those motivations, if you see what I mean. I think it's probably as simple as that. Yeah, so Geraldine's asking, is anger never an appropriate response? That's a really interesting question. I think I actually wouldn't say never, but what I would say is that anger is potentially very destructive, and you have to be really, really, really honest with yourself. If I think if metta is present, anger can arise and it will be okay. But if metta is not present and aversion is present, you've got something very dangerous on your hands, and it can be really destructive. I mean, it's a Buddhist tradition, particularly a tradition called the Mahayana, is like really super kind of cautious about anger. So you can destroy all the kind of positive momentum that you've built up. You can destroy it in an instant with a moment of anger. You know that yourself. You lose your temper, and you can create such a mess. You can create real division and upset and harm just through a moment of anger. So I wouldn't say never. Sometimes it feels like anger is it's like an energy that's trying to burst through some kind of barrier. But I would say that if metta is there, you'll probably be okay. But if it isn't, you might be in trouble, and other people might be in trouble too. So someone's asking, does that sort of answer your question, Geraldine? I can see you there. Yeah, it's an interesting area, that one. It often comes up. How does Buddhist ethics interact with vegetarianism, veganism? So in a way, what we eat falls particularly under the heading of the first precept. So if we're killing creatures or paying somebody else to kill creatures on our behalf, that's very clearly going against the spirit of metta. It's going against, it's not abstaining from harming living beings. Quite how far you want to take that, again, is one of these debatable areas. So I know a lot of my Buddhist friends are vegans because they feel that the production of dairy, for example, is inherently interwoven with the destruction of life. Different people make different calls. I think, yeah. I mean, where I am, I'm not a vegan. I think I should probably be, well, it would be good if I was. I kind of feel like I'm veganish. That's the way I describe myself. Um, and I think, so I think if I was stricter, I wouldn't eat any, particularly dairy. I don't eat very many eggs. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I think what we might think, particularly in terms of diet, in terms of a direction of travel. So I think we can think quite black and white in terms of ethics. But if you eat meat 7 times a week and you go to eating meat twice a week, like that would be a definite improvement. And I think sometimes that's what we need to think of in terms of ethics, is rather than thinking in black and white terms, thinking in terms of where do I want to go? What direction do I want to move in here? And actually begin to make a movement in that direction. So, for example, with the 5th precept, you might say, well, I'm still going to drink, but I'm not going to drink as much. So I'm just going to have, if I'm going to have a meal, I'm going to have 1 glass of wine. That's all, just 1. I'm not going to have 2, or I'm not going to have 3. I'm just going to have 1. And that can make quite a big difference. So you kind of set a boundary for yourself. But, you might actually say, actually, I don't want anything to do with alcohol. Now, a lot of people have got quite a problematic relationship with alcohol, either through their own life or through, their family life. I mean, it's an obvious point. But so for some people, just participating in alcohol consumption at all is just, they just don't want to have anything to do with it. And I can completely understand that. And also, again, when you're buying something, you're participating in an industry. And that's an additional ethical consideration. I mean, if you are distilling your own, it would be different. But when you're participating in industry that actively promotes the consumption of a dangerous drug, which is what alcohol is, frankly, you've got that's a consideration as well. Yeah. Someone's made the point, anger is often other emotions in disguise, which is certainly true. What if someone has been told to return to eating meat for health reasons? Therefore, they would do harm to themselves if they abstained. That's a very interesting question. I've sometimes asked myself that question. What if I was told by a doctor that I had to eat meat for my health? Would I? I'm not sure that I would, but I haven't been in that situation. I do have friends of mine who I respect who have taken to eating fish, for example, because for their health. And then there's the whole question about, if you've children, what do you feed your children? Before they're of the age where they can make up their own minds what they eat. So a lot of what ethics is about is actually asking the questions. It's not about knowing what the right answer is, but actually being willing to ask the question and being willing to actually modify what you do, modify the way that you live. Because you want your life to be an expression of what is important. Yeah. Anger can be useful if used as a vehicle for creativity. Yeah, well, I mean, in a way, like what I think that the danger is that if you're not in relationship to your anger, then you get depressed or you lose your energy, because there's a lot of anger and energy. And I think actually that's what we're trying to do. That's what we're trying to learn how to navigate when the fourth stage of the metta bhavana particularly. We're learning how to experience that resistance and intense feeling that can arise with anger, but trying to hold that within the context of metta. And then actually, like I say, it can be okay. So I think that that's where, yeah, if you're not in relationship to anger, it can be problematic, but to say the least. So I think if you are angry, it's much better to know that you're angry and feel that you're angry than feel guilty about it. So again, this is one of the problems with a kind of that kind of sense of ethics as something external which is coming onto you, is guilt, where we something unskillful is going on, and we compound it by feeling guilty about it. And guilt, from a Buddhist point of view, is not a helpful mental state. It's an unskillful mental state. And I think that's why it can be so difficult to unpick some of these ethical dilemmas, because there's all this added complication of guilt. On the other hand, shame, in the sense of a natural remorse for having done something that you wish you hadn't done, from a Buddhist point of view, is a skillful mental state. But that's distinguished from guilt, which is unhelpful, where you're worried about what some external force is thinking about you. Often that's where guilt comes from. Or you're worried about love being withdrawn if someone found out what you did, for example. So guilt, there's more to it than that, but I just wanted to point that out as well, because it's a big issue for a lot of people. Interesting. Someone said, thank you. Recently started eating meat after 30 years of vegetarianism due to health reasons. Interesting. Oh, blimey, there's lots of things coming in. My autoimmune disorder currently necessitates my eating animal products. Interesting. The Dalai Lama eats meat twice a week on doctor's orders because of jaundice. Yeah. It's very interesting. I mean, if you're going to, there's a whole question of like, if you're going to eat meat, where do you source it? Or if you're going to eat eggs, and apparently, for example, if you eat, goats can lactate ongoingly, whereas cows require a birth of a calf in order to lactate. So you can't. So what happens to the calves is the question. But apparently, so goat's milk apparently is more ethical than cow's milk. Someone was telling me. I mean, it's complex when you start digging into it. Yeah. Oh, someone's just actually made the same point. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, what about anger in regards to injustices? Again, well, I think I've already addressed that. It's like, I think what's really dangerous is righteous indignation, where we feel justified in hating somebody because they're doing something which is harmful. That's very dangerous. And I think a lot of the distress in the world is actually, a lot of the conflict in the world is exacerbated by people who don't understand what's going on, adding their weight in behind something out of anger and hatred. And I think we could do a lot to just actually, if we're going to get involved in some kind of conflict, make sure that we understand it deeply before we add our weight into it. And don't do it out of a sense of hatred, but out of a sense of wanting to help everybody. And again, that's why metta bhavana is so important, that if somebody's acting unskillfully, maybe grossly, they will be harming themselves. They'll be harming others. But if one is truly compassionate, one will feel compassion for them also. Now that's a challenge, to feel compassion for somebody who's oppressing somebody else, or being violent towards somebody else, as well as it's much easier to feel compassion for the underdog, as it were. But I think it's really valuable to investigate one's own mental states in relation to all of these things. Particularly if we come from an underdog, the underdog overdog thing is very interesting. You get it with kind of nations, in relation to other nations, the underdog, the overdog, or in minority groups. I mean, I'll give you an example, actually. I remember years ago, I was at a gay film festival in Wellington in New Zealand. This is about 25 years ago. and I was a gay man surrounded by all these gay men, and it was wonderful actually to being in this environment. And there was a film, and uh, it was about there were these people that were gay bashers, so they were trying to beat up these gay guys. Now it turned out there was more gay guys than there were gay bashers, and the gay bashers got beaten up. Now what was interesting was, like, when the gay bashers got beaten up, there was a great kind of cheer in the audience, like, yeah, and I felt really uncomfortable with that, because I didn't, that didn't feel right to me either, as it were. But it was just interesting. The underdog kind of attitude was like, we're getting our own back. But I didn't feel like I wanted to participate in that at that time. I hope you can kind of see what I mean. So I think you need to be careful about in this kind of area, and rigorously honest. So someone's asking, is suppressing, repressing anger the most skillful choice? Well, repressing anything is never a skillful choice, I would say. So repression is where you're holding something down and you don't know that you're doing it. So there's a lack of awareness there and a lack of honesty, which from a Buddhist point of view is deeply problematic. But suppression sometimes I think is appropriate, where you think, yeah, I'm angry, I'm just going to hold it there, I'm not going to express it. Sometimes that's actually necessary to prevent harm from happening, I think. So there's loads of stuff there. It's actually good to talk about. I'd prefer if it was more interactive, but it's a bit tricky with Zoom to have a conversation about these areas. So hopefully, I'm always terrified of being misunderstood or saying something that I shouldn't have, but maybe I have anyway. Maybe if I have, you'll forgive me. And also, like, we're all. Maybe one final point to make is that it's a messy business. Like, human life is a messy business. And you can have all the principles in the world, but when you start applying them, it's messy. And but it's just a matter of making sure that the mess is kind of moving in the right direction. If you see what I mean? That's, I think, as much as we can. We're never going to. I mean, in a way, that's where maybe the word perfect is a bit unhelpful, because human life is just a little bit messy. Like, for example, with food, we've got to eat something. And, the production of any kind of food, even if we only eat vegetables, will probably involve the taking of life somewhere, even if it's just a worm getting chopped in half. Do you know what I mean? So, anyway, you know what I mean. Let's do a little. I was thinking one of the ways that we refine our ethical sensibility, in the way that I was talking about earlier, is actually just through meditation, just through getting to know our mind better, and coming to understand whether it's skillful or unskillful, and seeing the connection between the kind of mind that we have and the kind of actions that we perform. So what I thought we'd do is just very, very simply just do a period of mindfulness of breathing, and just come right back to just being aware of our breathing, and just be plain and simple about it. So if you want to set yourself up for meditation, we'll do a period of mindfulness of breathing. So just letting the content of the talking subside. As we begin to attend to our body, our surroundings, so an immediate awareness of our immediate experience. So the mindfulness of breathing is a particularly good practice for developing the positive aspect of the third precept, so developing contentment. Learning to be satisfied, to positively enjoy the profoundly simple act of breathing. So what's your body doing as you breathe? Giving your attention to that. If you're very heady or agitated, you might like to bring your awareness deep down into your abdomen, your belly, feeling the movement and the rhythm of your breathing there. And to help us connect, to help us deepen from breath to breath our awareness, we place a count at the end of the out breath. And if there's distress in your experience, agitation, anger, worry, try not to push that away with the breathing, but include it in your awareness. Particularly, the out breath has a soothing quality, a releasing quality. So you might bring that to whatever distress is going on. So moving now into the second stage, placing the count just before the in-breath. And now letting go of the counting and just being with your breathing. Enjoying only having one simple thing to do. And just trust in the process that awareness will purify, harmonize, and integrate your mind wherever you are in that process. We'll finish with a few minutes of just sitting. So having heard about ethics, just staying in meditation, but just reflecting on one thing that you'd like to abstain from. So one thing that you recognize that it'd actually be better if I didn't do that thing. It might be an explicit expression of one of the 5 precepts. Don't worry if something doesn't come naturally, just leaving the space for something to bubble up. And then think of something that you'd like to do, something skillful that you'd like to do a bit more of. Something that would express you at your best. And just checking that you want to do those things because you can see that would be beneficial. So not undertaking to do them out of piety or martyrdom or conformity, but because you yourself can see that acting in that way would be of benefit to yourself and others. So yes, if you'd like to just bring the meditation to a close. So yeah, so what we were looking at there is just the home practice for this week is well, first of all, actually just bringing more a general thing, which is bringing more awareness to the connection between our actions and our mental states. So when we act skillfully, that'll be an expression of a skillful mental state. When we act unskillfully, it will be an expression of an unskillful mental state. And what we're trying to do is to see the connections between those things. to see the connection between what we do and the effect that that has more and more deeply. And yeah, if we keep meditating and if we keep developing awareness and we keep trying to see what's going on in our lives more deeply, that will happen. So in a way, what we'll find is that we'll develop that sensitivity, that ethical sensitivity that informs an ethical life. It's a natural process of how we can live from, well, in a way, perfect vision and perfect emotion more and more. It'd be a natural expression of that. And we'll be able to live more completely, more totally. So that's another aspect is, the perfect action really is the preserve of the Buddha, who is able to act completely and wholly. That's one of the ways that the Buddha is described, that when he does something, he does it with his whole being. And so often we know that we're not. I certainly get frustrated with myself that I'm sort of divided. Part of me is into doing what I'm doing and part of me wants to do something else. So what we're trying to perfect action really is when there's no dissonance, there's no agitation, there's no restlessness, there's a complete wholehearted engagement. So that's the first thing, so bringing more awareness to the connection between our actions and our mental states. And then secondly, just thinking of something unskillful that you'd like to abstain from and something skillful that you'd like to practice this week. So we'll leave it there for this week. Next week, we're going to look at work. We're going to look at livelihood. So quite an interesting topic, particularly at the moment for a lot of us. It's all quite different for a lot of us. But anyway, we're going to explore that all next week when we look at the fifth limb of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is right livelihood or perfect livelihood. So we'll send you a video and an email with the video and various other bits and pieces, and look forward to seeing you next week.